This is Cara Cowan Watts with Cherokee 411, and today we're here with Chief Chad Smith, who served the great Cherokee Nation from 1999 to 2011, and he's been putting up with me since 2003. And you can tell he's real excited about it. That same smirk I got many times in the tribal council chambers. So we're here with Chief Chad Smith because he has published a book just for us, if I can say us today, Cherokee Nation, Proceed Undaunted. So if you didn't know who Chad was, or Chief Smith, during his 12 years as our leadership in the Cherokee Nation, that's unfortunate because he wasn't just our chief, he is a legal scholar and historian for us here in the Cherokee Nation and all things Cherokee. So in his pseudo-retirement, in which he's never retired, because I promise you, he still serves us, the Cherokee people, he has written a book in his spare time to explain contemporary Cherokee Nation history, politics, and especially our all-important Constitution, which governs us still today. So we're here with Chad, or Chief Smith, depending on how you know him. You're going to call him Chad or Chief Smith. But we're here with him today because he has volunteered his time to help us understand why we need to go and purchase and read this massive book that explains why it's so important to get out and vote in our Cherokee Nation and how we are governed today. So let's hear more from Chad. Chief Smith, would you like to introduce yourself and the book for us and tell our listeners more about why they want to go out to Amazon and purchase your book and how they buy it?
Thank you very much, Cara. And I wish I could tell a story on you. You're right, it's been tolerant since 2003, but I'll have to say it's been if you want a racehorse or a mule, you're certainly the racehorse, and it's trying to keep up with you has always been a challenge and a welcome. People don't need to read my book. They don't need to buy it. The only thing they need to remember is that we have a constitution based upon fundamental principles. For the Cherokee Nation to survive another 200 years, we need to follow the constitution. And it's not being followed. That's really what the book's about. Documenting in the last 20 years, particularly in the last 10 or 15, that the Constitution has been violated. And I started writing the book because I do a lot of litigation against the tribe, violations of civil rights, wrongful discharges, other things. And it got to be that moment that even though Popeye's a bit of a racist, he's got a great cliche. He says, stands all it can stand, and it can't stand some. So I started converting those lawsuits to narratives. And it became even more compelling when it's not written as a legal brief, as a story about real people, their rights being denied, the harm and damage done to Cherokee folks. And it's not by outsiders, it's by elected and appointed officials. So I began to change those briefs into narratives. And I approached University Press, and they said, well, that's good, but you know what we really need is the history of the Constitution, with the current violations or episodes perspective. That got a bunch of work I didn't realize, and I now have a greater appreciation for scholars because you have to go back and document and research, and became fascinating. It was a great education. And it led me to the belief, by finding historical evidence and common sense, that the constitutions are based upon, in particular the Cherokee Constitution, based upon fundamental principles. These are the things that drive us as a people and that we aspire to be. And I thought, well, we've got the 1827 Constitution. That must be the starting point. Well, didn't the Cherokees have these fundamental principles before there was English introduced to the Cherokees, or even before Sequoyah introduced the syllabary? What was that source? Was it recorded sometime? And I look back and I listened to Benny Smith and read his writings, and it's the wampum belts. Wampum belts have been around since time immemorial. How they've come to where they're at today is always a question. But it's pretty much accepted that the wampum belts from the Stoke Stomp grounds are those that have guided the Cherokee people since time immemorial. So if you look at those principles in those belts, the White Path and others, it tells us how we should behave as people, it tells us how our government should behave, and it tells us what we should expect of our elected officials. So the first part of the book is talking about the wampum belt, and then how periods of history have helped us form our Constitution and how we should adhere to it. 1827 was one of the first tribes that uh, enacted a Constitution, and was sort of had two functions at that time. In the previous 10, 15 years before 1827, Cherokees had began to codify principles through law. It was only in 1827 they sort of bound those together and followed the federal and state format via constitution. The other thing that was really fascinating about it, it was like Cherokees planting this flag, poking a stick in the eye of Georgia, saying, "We are a constitutional government. We demand respect. We're not going to go any place." And there's a great book, not a great book, but it's a very fascinating one. It's called The History of Gwinnett County, Georgia, written in 1840. It's 1940. And it talked about the gall, supreme effrontery, the Cherokees setting up a constitutional government within the boundaries of Georgia, as Georgia naturally regarded it. So the Cherokees stood up and almost spat in his face at Georgia, saying, "We're a constitutional government. Come on."
So real sovereignty.
It really was. And it's real sovereignty in a language of the American legal system. Took that language, we adapted it, we adopted it, and it became our own. And we owed a lot to those handful of young, bright, educated folks that went to Northeast to be college educated because they were very skilled jurists. But then the Trail of Tears. I mean, we all know how awful it was. But the legal violations of it was, and after the Trail of Tears, our 1839 Constitution and our Act of Union in 1839 to try to pull the pieces together of all the Cherokee factions and people. One of the great sort of historical notes is that Sequoyah was a great statesman. He brought those factions together and represented the old settlers, that Act of Union. So then we go through history. What caused the amendments to the 1866 treaty? What happened in 1906 with the acts to allot the land and assimilate the Cherokees? What happened for the next 70 years under bureaucratic imperialism through the Bureau of Indian Affairs from 1906 until 1975? And so there's 180 pages devoted to challenges on the Constitution, how the Cherokees responded to those challenges. And the real marker is, the barometer, the real measurement is, did we follow our own Constitution? Each of those periods of time.
So Chief Smith, the backbone of the book is this constitutional history for Cherokee Nation, really. And then just to make sure that folks are catching some of the key things you're talking about, you name David Cummingdeer in his case, right? People know David. I don't think people know that he hasn't been paid. You have not been paid on that settlement, even though you won in court with a jury of Cherokee peers, of his peers. No one is, Cherokee Nation has not paid the 600,000, which would, your legal fees would come out of and such. So that really puts these thousands of employees at risk, because you're talking about in the book how they've gutted the Whistleblower Protections Act and the protections for our employees after they've been there so long and gained tenure. That's no longer the case, right? That's what's in your book.
It's what's in that's the tail end of the book. Is
Okay.
The first part of the book is the history, 9 chapters. Part 2 is current events, and part 3 is the future. Part 4 is reference documents, all the Cherokee constitutions, Treaty of 1846, so people can go back and look. And they actually can go back to the indexes and see who was in office at the time, making those kind of decisions. So if we take the Constitution through 1975, it's a big event. And we came out of this period of bureaucratic imperialism. Probably the epitome of the high point, good governance of the Cherokee Nation, was the 1999 Constitution, led by Jay Hanna. It was the one moment in history that almost warring factions came together and said, we can design something better for them. And those protections in that 1990 Constitution are those that have been violated in the last decade or so. You mentioned the David Cumming case. Article 12 of the Constitution protects employees, gives them tenure, gives them due process. I've also passed during Wilma Mankiller's administration whistleblowing action. Well, David went to trial. Michael Moore and I tried his case in front of a jury for 4 days. The jury came back in an hour and found that he had been wrongfully discharged, been retaliated for whistleblowing, and awarded him $615,000. Tribe appealed. Took a year for that appeal. Let me take this back. The jury issued its verdict, and it took the judge, the trial court judge, 1 year to issue a final judgment. And when he issued that final judgment, he says, oh, by the way, I don't have any jurisdiction. The case had been pending over 6 years, all sorts of motions, previous appeals to the Supreme Court. And after a year sitting on it, oh, by the way, I just don't have jurisdiction. I'm going to just throw this jury verdict out. We appealed it, and the Supreme Court sustained it in part. But no, Dave's not got. There's other cases. There's other cases equally egregious. There's a lady who was at the PACE program. It's been 10 years fighting to get a due process hearing, which is guaranteed under the Constitution, 2000. So we desperately judicial reform. But the point is that the second part of the book talks about many episodes of violations of the Constitution.
So, Chief Smith, I know that I have continued to get a number of phone calls from employees that feel like they were wrongly terminated or just walked out and there was no reason given and they were tenured. And I think they've given up. There's no one that can represent them. They don't feel like they're going to get a fair shot in court. So what I'm hearing you, I know there's at least 2 cases that I personally watched that you were representing folks, including David Cumming Deer, where it took 8 or 10 years. And basically their lives were on hold just to get some ruling on whether there was fairness in the Cherokee Nation. And I'm going to take my platform for just a second. So one of the things that I always thought was beautiful about the Cherokee government was we had a court system that people could participate in, even to the point where a fool such as myself could represent themselves in tribal court, which was always beautiful because you never want to be your own attorney. But I've had that opportunity and I enjoyed it. And I won, by the way. But that has just really been cut off now. with these current administrations and post McGirt, like people don't have that opportunity, it seems like, anymore. And they're just dragging people out to ruin their lives 8, 10 years later. Financially, they're ruined, and otherwise they lose careers. That's what I've witnessed.
Well, the council has repealed the protections for employees, and uh, the act repealed it was called the Employee Justice Act, which is this bizarre way of gaslighting. It's actually the opposite. They changed the standard of proof, made it much harder to bring a case. They suppressed uh, the evidence. They made it harder to get a lawyer, made it harder to win. Even if you win, then you got to get permission of the council to pay a judgment. I mean, the gauntlet such that no
I'm
lawyer
sorry,
will take it.
you
And
said they have to get permission from the tribal council to pay a judgment? Well, and you haven't addressed the idea where they seem to put, if you go and you file a grievance or you file a complaint or file a lawsuit, if you don't win in their court, then they're going to get a suit, put a counter judgment against you, and you're going to owe them tons of money, right? Is that happening too?
they can collect their attorney fees if you don't, which is really bizarre because prior to this amendment, as always, the employee could recover his attorney fees, not the tribe. So it's another way to suppress uh, whistleblowing and employment cases.
And it's no joke about how they label the legislation for headlines versus what's really in it.
It's pretty creative.
I mean, it is. The idea. I remember during our time serving together when I was in the legislative branch and you were our executive chief. Um, we couldn't move a muscle, and if they didn't think, there was always people at the meetings. There was always people asking questions and watching us. And I'm sure they were frustrated, but we always answered. We answered our FOIAs. We tried to talk to people, even if we didn't agree with them and they didn't agree with us. And I feel like that has been cut off too. I think both of us have put in Freedom of Information Acts that have been really ignored, or it's almost comical in a bad way, the response we have received and how long it took to receive a response. I don't know if that's fair or not, but do you talk about your FOIAs in the book? I haven't quite finished it yet. So,
Yep, your case is in there. Deborah Reed's got a case in there. I've got a case in there. FOIA is a shield for the administration to prevent information to go out. And it's humorous and it's a wasted exercise.
so, so Chad, we can talk for hours about your book, and I'm probably going to have you back on, right? Like, this isn't going to be the end of the discussion, but this is what my takeaway, and I want to make sure I accurate, is that, like, if they get your book and take time to read it, they're going to get the historical. I think it's not just our at large. I know the folks inside the Cherokee Nation also care about the history and how we've developed as a government. And they're going to get a big dose of that in your book about our government and how it's shaped to be formed today. Then these contemporary issues that are not being communicated by the Cherokee Phoenix, by the mainstream press, about what's really happening to our people, especially here at home, our employees and other folks that they've done, and the politics of it all. It's not being communicated out. So they're going to get a dose of that, right? If they read the book, they're going to get this bigger context that you're really providing, and you source your materials. So this is not fake news. This is like legitimate. You're giving them, here's what it is. I'm giving you my analysis as the legal expert in Cherokee history, and here's the references. So don't just believe me. Go look at it yourself, right? You're giving that all to them.
It's 700 pages, 1,500 footnotes. Here's how the thing ends. When I started it, I thought, boy, this is dismal. And I was reminded through some young folks, their writings online, that, there's hope. When I started the book, title was There Once Was a Great Cherokee Nation, but it is no more. And I'm sure you've heard that little adage that if we don't make right decisions, that's what's going to happen to us. Will be a footnote, some history book on page 40. But after going through the entirety of our history, reading what these young folks said, seeing people trying to the best they can in the communities, it began to resound even greater when I used the words "proceed undaunted." Regardless, keep on with the legacy we've been gifted. Continue working through it. That's why the title became the title it is. Is that bottom line is here's lessons of history. Learn from them. Should proceed undaunted.
Very good. Well, Jourdæ, thank you for being with us today. We're going to have you back on. We have other issues to talk about. There's always so much to talk about. It's Cherokee Nation, right? I mean, there's a ton, but I can't thank you enough for writing the book, for sticking with our people, with being on this morning. And I look forward to seeing the response. I know people will post questions, they'll post comments, and we'll have more to talk about because we're going to have you back on about the book. We're going to talk about the United Keetoowah Band, the Lumbees. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff on some other interviews, but I'm glad to see your face today, and I'm glad that you took time for us. So
let me share
I was going to say,
you.
is there anything else?
Yeah, you get it on Amazon. I chose not to go with the publisher because they would double the price. But to keep the price down of a 700-page book, went to Amazon. It's paperback. It's not going to be the glamour that other folks would expect with a history book of this size. But the cover is gorgeous. The content is real. And so I chose Amazon's to make it accessible to people. They know how to go to Amazon when they may not want to go to Barnes and Noble. That's the whole of a coverback book on Amazon.
And so I brought 3 copies for me and my family, and I still have to get you to sign them when you're home. And we're going to have a book signing is the plan in Tulsa, I think, right? We're going to have a book, and you'll probably read from it or talk to us. And so look for that, Cherokee 411 folks. But I want to say the price point is $35. Is that right?
29.
29. Okay, so I may have had tax. But you get it on Amazon, and he tried to keep the price low so that it was accessible to all of us. And I know many of our readers at Cherokee 411 have already been reading it because they've even emailed me to ask you questions, and you've been interacting, which I enjoyed. So any other words of wisdoms for us, Chief?
Proceed undaunted.
Very good. Jourdæ. Well, until next time, we'll see you again out there. Thanks for watching Cherokee 411.
Join the conversation. Discover stories and insights that matter to you. Subscribe to Cherokee 411 with Cara and stay connected with independent media, real, relevant, and unfiltered.